Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chairman in his opening statement laid out a pattern of corruption, nepotism, and mismanagement occurring at the Trump State Department. And as I was listening, it seemed more like examples from dictatorships around the world that our country has a history of condemning. And in the face of staggering evidence of misconduct and lawlessness, it's important we take a moment to applaud the men and women at the State Department who continue to serve as this administration erodes our standing in the world, works around enacted legislation to sell arms to Saudi Arabia, or fires those brave enough to investigate their wrongdoing. So, Secretary Bellateo, I want to begin with you. I want to ask you some statements Secretary Pompeo made. When the Secretary was asked about whether he knew the fired Inspector General was investigating him, he claimed that he had no knowledge of this. Here's what he told the Washington Post. "It's not possible. My recommendation to the President was based on any effort to retaliate for any investigation that was going on or is currently going on, because I simply don't know. I'm not briefed on it, so it's simply not possible for this to be an act of retaliation." End of story. That was the end of his quote. That wasn't true, was it? Because there were two investigations the IG was doing of the Secretary. One involved his role in bypassing a congressional prohibition on arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And as the New York Times revealed, Secretary Pompeo knew that the Inspector General was investigating this issue because the Inspector General had asked to interview him. And Secretary Pompeo refused and instead chose to answer written questions. So it's indisputable that Secretary Pompeo knew about this investigation. The other investigation was examining whether Secretary Pompeo and his wife abused his office by asking State Department employees to run personal errands for them. Mr. Linick, the Inspector General, told the committee that he spoke to you and Deputy Secretary Begun in late 2019 about the fact that his staff would be requesting documents from the Office of the Secretary related to the alleged misuse of government resources by Secretary Pompeo and his wife. And he said he told you this so that you and the Secretary would not be surprised and would understand why they were requesting those documents. Mr. Linick testified under oath, under the penalty of false statement, rather, when he told the committee this. So my first question, Mr. Bellateo, is, was Mr. Linick lying when he told the committee that he spoke with you about this investigation in 2019, months before he was fired? That's a yes or a no?
No.
Okay, so he wasn't fired.
Hold on, no. Let me clarify to the question there. Mr. Linick never talked to me about that in 2019. No, he did not talk to me about that.
Okay, so, Mr. Bellateo, I find this very hard to believe. Secretary Pompeo is one of your oldest and closest friends. You've known him since your days at West Point. You were business partners. And you're asking this committee to accept that you didn't, in fact, have a conversation with the Inspector General where you were told that he was conducting an investigation of a person one of your closest friends, for abusing his office. I find that very hard to believe. Now, Mr. Linick also requested documents. You've said he didn't speak to you. I don't believe you. Mr. Linick then requested documents for his investigation of Secretary Pompeo's misuse of staff. You were aware of these document requests, correct?
No.
You weren't aware that document requests were made of the Secretary?
No. What I was aware of was that the Inspector General was conducting a preliminary inquiry.
Okay, so change the word. Preliminary inquiry, which is another word for investigation of the Secretary, correct?
No, the topic that I was informed of, and I received an email from the IG's office, is they were conducting a preliminary inquiry on official travel.
And did you tell Mr. Pompeo that he and his wife were under investigation for allegedly misusing State Department staff?
No, sir.
Again, I find that difficult to believe, sir. Again, Mr. Pompeo is one of your closest friends. Mr. Pompeo, did you, Secretary Pompeo has said that he recommended to President Trump that Mr. Linick be removed from office. This was a big step for the Secretary to take. I presume he discussed it with you.
The Secretary mentioned that he was going to make a recommendation to the President sometime in the early April.
And I presume, Mr. Bellateo, that when when you had that conversation with Secretary Pompeo, you must have thought to yourself, oh my goodness, this will look bad. If you fire an Inspector General who's investigating you and your wife for misconduct, it will look bad. And you must have given him some advice, or at least told him about that.
Again, Congressman, you keep alluding to that I knew about some kind of investigation.
Well, you just said you knew about a preliminary inquiry.
About travel. That's what I told you, about travel.
An investigation.
And I welcome an investigation about travel. It's good. We got to make sure we get travel right. So that was not an issue. There was no issue about the IG investigating travel. Well, none whatsoever. Although I was surprised when the Secretary mentioned that he was going to do that, because I was surprised it took him that long.
Well, Mr. Beltier, what you're
Based on the
saying,
performance
to be
of
very frank with you, just doesn't add up. We know that Mr. Pompeo wasn't telling the truth when he denied knowing about the IG's arms sales investigation. I think he's also misleading the public when he denies knowing about the investigation of his misuse of
I
State
think it's
Department
outrageous
employees,
that you're calling the
just as he
Secretary
tried
a
to
liar,
obfuscate the
Congressman.
reasons around Mr. Lennox firing and stymie everyone except his best friend from coming forward, coming to Congress to tell us what happened. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.